The kitchen smelled like coffee burned onto the bottom of the pot, and underneath that, something like a handful of old change left in a hot car. It was 10:32 in the morning on Tuesday, April 14th, in my grandmother's kitchen at 412 Fevin Bellefonte Avenue, and my mother-in-law had a fist in my hair at the base of my skull. Her other hand was flat on the counter next to the sugar bowl, bracing, the way you brace before you lift something heavy. Behind the basement door, the dog was throwing himself against the wood. She had shut him down there when she came in, without looking, the way you move a chair out of a doorway. My husband was at the table with a coffee cup in front of him, steam still coming off it. On the table beside his cup was a green spiral notebook, open, and a page in it was covered top to bottom in the same handwriting, over and over, 40 or 50 times. My scrub cap was on the floor by the refrigerator where it had come off. I remember thinking I needed to pick it up before somebody stepped on it. Then she said, "You're going to be reasonable, Delaney," and she moved her weight forward onto her front foot. My name is Delaney Pruitt. I was 29 that spring. I live in Dayton, Ohio, and I worked third shift in sterile processing at Fairmont Mercy on Wayne Avenue. Decontamination, 10:30 at night to 7 in the morning, 4 nights a week. I ran instruments through the washers, inspected them under a lighted magnifier, built trays, sealed them, logged them. Every tray has my employee number on it, 40912, and a timestamp down to the minute, because that is how a hospital proves a hip replacement got clean tools. I want you to remember that because by the middle of that April, the only proof I had that I was a person in a place was a plastic badge and a strip of paper from a machine that counts surgical instruments. Here is the question, and I want you to answer it honestly. If your husband's mother sat in your grandmother's kitchen and told you to quit the job that paid your rent, and everyone else at that table nodded, would you have said no out loud, right then? Or would you have gone quiet and figured it out later, the way I did? I married into the Vesey family in 2019. They were not poor. The way they spent money was never about having it. It was about who they thought was worth spending it on. When my sister-in-law got married in 2017, Lorraine wrote a check for $19,000 for a venue in Oakwood. When Price and I got married 2 years later at the Montgomery County Courthouse, she gave us a $75 gift card to a chain restaurant on Brown Street. In 2021, she put $31,500 down on a condo for Marlowe, because a girl should not rent. That fall, I asked whether the family ever lent money, because my certification exam cost $325 and my car insurance was due the same week. She told me the family did not lend money for hobbies. In January of 2022, my furnace quit. Lorraine brought over a space heater she had gotten free with a mattress purchase, and in March she asked for it back for the sunroom, because it retailed for $40. And here is the part I am not proud of. For years I thought the way they talked about me was a compliment. Lorraine said it at every holiday, with her hand on my arm. Delaney's the tough one. Delaney doesn't need looking after. It took me until I was 29 to hear that sentence correctly. Being the one nobody has to worry about only means you are the one they never have to spend anything on. The person who did look after me was my grandmother, Corinne Pruitt, 73, 31 years in the linen department of the same hospital I ended up working in. She washed surgical gowns in that basement from 1979 until her knees quit. Her kitchen was the good place. She made the coffee too strong and then complained about it. She kept a beagle, 14 years old, deaf as a brick, who slept against the oven door in winter because it was warm. She would say something outrageous about a neighbor and then say, "Now don't repeat that," and repeat it herself to the next caller. In 2016, she came up my apartment steps with a folded job posting in her purse. Sterile processing trainee, night differential. She stood there while I filled it out. She said, "You're going to work inside the building, not underneath it." And when I passed my exam, she gave me a scrub cap she had sewn herself, out of one of my grandfather's shirts, a soft blue check, the one he wore to the plant. He had been dead 2 years by then. She doubled the seam on the inside of the band, because a cap that scratches will make you take it off at the wrong time. I have a thing I do with it. Before every shift, in my car in the lot, I run my thumb along the inside of that seam. 3 passes. I never told anybody that, including my husband. That cap and that job were mine. Nobody gave them to me to be polite. In February, Corinne got a surgery date. Right hip, total replacement. Tuesday, April 14th, 7 in the morning. At a hospital in Columbus, 70 miles up 70. 5 days inpatient, then rehab. From the day she called me with that date, there was a clock running in my house, and everything that happened for the next 9 weeks happened underneath it. Lorraine started coming around the week after that call. First it was a key, because somebody had to be able to get in if Corinne fell. I stayed quiet, because she was right. Her balance was bad and I slept until 3 in the afternoon. Then it was the appointments. She started driving her, carrying a green spiral notebook into the exam rooms, calling herself the family's health advocate to people she barely knew. Then it was the camera. She had a doorbell camera installed in March, mounted crooked over my grandmother's mailbox, and she paid for the recording plan herself. She said she wanted to see who came up those steps. Every time, I had a reason a reasonable person would accept. She was retired, and I was not. She was there in the daytime, and I was not. My grandmother was 73 and going under anesthesia, and somebody had to be organized about it. Corinne pushed back exactly once, at her own kitchen table, about the camera. She said nobody needed a television show of her own front door. Lorraine put her hand over my grandmother's hand and said, "Sweetheart, we're not going to make decisions while you're on the pain pills." Corinne looked at me. I looked at the sugar bowl. That is on me, and I will not pretend otherwise. And at Thanksgiving, before any of this, Lorraine had made a joke. She had a glass of wine in her hand, and she laughed and said, "If something happens to Corinne, Delaney will be too tied up at that hospital to handle any of it. Good thing she's got me." Everybody laughed. I laughed. Hold on to that sentence because I heard it again later, word for word out of a stranger's mouth, and it was not a joke and never had been. On March 8th, we had dinner at Lorraine's house on Ashcombe Court for her birthday. Pot roast, the good plates, the dining room she never let anybody eat in. Marlo Vesey, 33, my sister-in-law, a residential realtor, with her face on a bus bench on Far Hills. Halfway through dinner, she put her fork down and said, "That house is going to need a caretaker, not a night shift." The table got quiet in a way that told me it had been discussed before I got there. Lorraine said, very warmly, "Delaney, honey, you need to think about giving up those nights." I said I liked my job. I said the differential was $4.10 an hour. Marlo said, "It's not like it's a career." Then she picked her fork back up and said, "Ignore me, I've had a week." And Lorraine changed the subject, and the whole thing folded up like it had never been opened. Price walked me to the car. I asked him what that was. He said his mother worries. He said his sister is dramatic. He said, "Let it go." So I let it go. I made that choice with my eyes open, because it was easier at 10 o'clock at night in a driveway. On April 3rd, I went over to Bellefonte Avenue to change the furnace filter before the surgery. Lorraine's car was out front. I came around the side of the house and the storm window was cracked 2 inches at the bottom, and she was in the front room on speakerphone, and I got the tail end of it. A man's voice said something I could not make out, and Lorraine said, "She doesn't need to be in the room. The name has to be on the line before the 9th. Then a chair moved and I heard the dog's tags and I went around and came in the back like I had just gotten there. I stood in that kitchen with a furnace filter under my arm and built myself an explanation in about 9 seconds. Surgical consent. Pre-op paperwork. Anesthesia forms, which do have deadlines and do get signed by family, and which I had been asked about the week before. That is what I decided it was, and then I went down to the basement and changed the filter. I have thought about those 9 seconds more than I have thought about the injury. On Monday the 13th, her neighbor drove her to Columbus and checked her into the hotel across from the hospital, and at 7 the next morning she was under anesthesia 70 miles away, and she would be in a recovery ward with no phone in her hand until Thursday. She had booked that date in February. Nobody moved it. It was the first opening the surgeon had. Before she left, she stood on her own porch and told me 2 things. She said, "Don't let the dog on the good chair." And she said, "Don't sign anything while I'm asleep." I laughed at her. I actually laughed. I got off shift at 7:06 that Tuesday morning and drove to Bellefonte to let the dog out, and Lorraine's car was already in the driveway at 9:40, with Marlowe's behind it and my husband's truck behind that. They were in the kitchen. There was a manila folder on the table and Lorraine had the coffee going in my grandmother's pot. She sat me down. She poured me a cup. She put her hand on my wrist and she was gentle, and that is the part people never believe. She said, "Sweetheart, you are running yourself into the ground. You work nights, you sleep days. And now that woman is going to need somebody in that house around the clock for 6 months. You cannot do both. Nobody could do both." She said, "You're going to give notice at that hospital this week, and you're going to be with her, and we are going to make sure the house is set up right so you're not carrying it alone." Then she opened the folder. There were 2 documents. The top one was a resignation letter, already typed, already dated, with my name spelled correctly, the address of the Fairmont Mercy Human Resources Office in the header, and a blank line at the bottom with my name printed underneath it. Underneath it was the other one, and it took me 4 or 5 seconds to understand what I was looking at. It had a heading in bold across the top, General Warranty Deed. Under that, smaller print with a case file number and a law office in Kettering. And it said, and I am reading this the way I read it that morning, that the grantor, being of sound mind, does hereby grant, bargain, sell and convey unto the grantee all interest in the real property situated in the county of Montgomery, state of Ohio, being 4-127 Bellefonte Avenue. And below that, personally appeared before me a notary public in and for said county, this 9th day of April. And below that, on the line, was my signature. Not a printed name, my signature. The loop I put on the D, the flat little tail I put on the Y. I said, "I didn't sign this." Lorraine did not blink. She said, "You're going to, and then it's true." Marlowe said the house needed to be in a name that could carry the taxes, and mine was fine for that. And Lorraine leaned in and did the one thing she had been saving. She said, "When your car threw a rod in 2019, I wrote a check for $2,850 on a Tuesday, and I never once asked you for it back. And God help me, for one whole sentence I felt it. I felt like I owed her. Then I said no. I said it once, flat. Then the rest of it, in about 11 words. I said the house is my grandmother's and the job is mine. I said I'm not quitting. I said no. Nobody said anything. The refrigerator kicked on. Outside, a car door shut 2 houses down and somebody's radio was playing through an open window, one of those songs where the chorus is just a man saying a woman's name. Lorraine stood up. She did not shout. That is the thing I could never make people understand afterward. She walked around the table, shifted her weight onto her front foot, reached out with her left hand and took a handful of my hair at the base of my skull, close to the scalp where you cannot pull away from, and put her right hand flat on the counter beside the sugar bowl to brace. Then she brought my forehead down into the edge of the counter. The first one I did not feel as pain, it arrived as light, a white bar across everything, and then I was looking at the underside of the cabinet, and the thought I had, the actual thought, the only one, was that my grandmother had shelf liner up there with strawberries on it, and I had never once seen it from that angle in 29 years. The second one was different, and the second one was not the counter. She turned me and put her forearm across the front of my throat and put her body behind it, into the corner of the cabinet, and held it. There was no bang to that one. It was a sound with no outside to it, a wet click somewhere under my jaw, like a latch closing in another room of my own body. Then things started going out in order and I could follow every one of them. My hands went first, both of them, all the way to the wrists, gone cold like I had been outside. Then my tongue. Then the sound in the room dropped an octave and got further away, the way it does underwater. Then my knees stopped being mine. And my hands did not fight her. My hands went down along the floor, found the scrub cap where it had fallen by the refrigerator, and closed on it. Soft blue check, my grandfather's shirt, my grandmother's stitches on the inside of the band. I remember thinking about her hands doing that seam, doubling it over so it would not scratch me. I remember thinking, very calmly, that this was the last thing I was ever going to touch, and that at least somebody who loved me had touched it first. And the thing that made me angry, actually angry, the only anger I had in the whole thing, was that something warm was running down into my ear, and I could not lift my hand to get it, and behind the basement door the dog was screaming and screaming and screaming, and I could not tell him it was all right. Then she let go and I was on the floor. And my sister-in-law, standing 4 feet away with her arms folded, said, "You had to keep pushing her." My husband's hands came 6 inches up off that table. I know it was 6 inches because I could see the gap under his palms against the edge of the wood, and the edge of that table is where I had done homework. His mouth opened and he said one word, and the word was, "Mom." Then he sat back down. Nobody in that kitchen called anybody. The 3 of them stood there with me on the floor and my throat closing, and not one of them picked up a phone. At 10:40 a man knocked on the front door, and then he opened it, because it was unlocked and because he had an appointment. His name was Odell Marchetti. He was 52 years old, and he had been installing stair lifts and grab bars for 26 years, and he had a clipboard and a laser measure in a bag, and he was there at 10:40 that morning, because Lorraine Vesey had called his company on April 2nd and booked a measurement for the front staircase at 4127 Bellefonte Avenue. Everything that happened for the rest of my life happened because my mother-in-law wanted a stair lift in a house she was about to own. I could see him from the floor. I watched his face empty out completely and then come back with something else in it. Lorraine said, "We've had a family emergency, we'll reschedule, you can go." He said, "No ma'am." He was already dialing. He crossed the kitchen, crouched down, put 2 fingers on my wrist, said his own address into the phone twice because he could not remember Corinne's, then read it off an envelope on the counter. He did not leave that room. When Marlowe told him he was trespassing, he said he would take that up with somebody later. Here is the other thing Lorraine had scheduled. Lorraine had been on the Fairmont Mercy Auxiliary Board for 11 years. It was the thing she was, at church and at the garden club. And in March she had arranged for the Auxiliaries Comfort Committee, 6 women in red vests who deliver meal trays to families in a rough patch, to come to 4127 Bellefonte Avenue at 11 o'clock that Tuesday morning, with a camera, for a spring newsletter photograph of Lorraine caring for her son's grandmother-in-law. She had put it on the calendar herself. It arrived on schedule. So at 11:04, when the medic unit was in the driveway and a sheriff's deputy was writing on the porch and Odell Marchetti was giving a statement, 6 women in red vests came up that front walk with a casserole and a camera, and the front door was standing wide open, and they could see straight down the hall into the kitchen. Lorraine turned around on that porch and tried to save it. She said, "This is a private family matter." She said, "Delaney has not been well for a long time. She's been off her medication. We've all been worried." And Odell Marchetti said, out loud in front of all of them, "Ma'am, I was standing right there. I watched you do it." Her right hand went out and found the porch rail, and she held it, and her shoulders came down about an inch and stayed there. I could not talk. Not one word. I could make a sound like a door hinge, and that was all. The medic was a woman in her 50s with a gray braid, and she got down on the floor next to me and put her finger into my hand and said, "You're not talking today, honey, and that's the right call. Squeeze once for yes." They took me to my own hospital, where the charge nurse in the ER knew my name, 2 staples above the hairline, both eyes filled in red from burst vessels, and a laryngeal fracture on the left side. I did not speak a word out loud for 11 weeks. I could not swallow anything thicker than broth for 9 days. There is a scar inside my throat nobody will ever see, and I will feel it every time I sing along in the car. 3 days later, on Friday, April 17th at 1:15 in the afternoon, there was a meeting. It had been on the calendar since the 1st of April. Lorraine had set it up herself, and because she was who she was, she had booked the conference room off the atrium at Fairmont Mercy on the same day as the auxiliary's spring donor luncheon, so she could sign at 1 and walk out at 2, as the woman who had saved her family. The luncheon went ahead. 90-some people at round tables under that glass roof. I went. My grandmother was in a rehab bed in Columbus and I could not speak, so I brought a folder and a pen and sat down. Her lawyer was Ferris Ludlam, 63, an estate attorney out of Kettering on Schroyer Road. He had prepared the deed and his office had notarized it. He stood up when I came in, and he had a professional face on, and then he saw me. The staples, both eyes solid red all the way around. The collar, the fact that I sat down and did not say hello, because I could not. I opened my folder and I slid 2 pieces of paper across the table to him, side by side, and I put my finger on the first one and then the second one, and I waited. The first was my badge access report from Fairmont Mercy Security for the night of April 9th. Badge 40912, Pruitt, D. Entry, Door SP3, Decontamination Corridor, 10:41 p.m. No exit until 7:06 a.m. on the 10th. 12 interior swipes in between, because you cannot walk from decon to assembly without a badge, and the system does not care who you are related to. The second was the instrument tray log for that same night. Tray 22 of 47, sealed and logged at 11:44 p.m. Tray 23 logged at 12:03 a.m., my employee number on both. And the deed on the table in front of him said that I had personally appeared before a notary public in Montgomery County on the 9th day of April at 11:52 p.m. 11:44, 11:52, 12:03, 26 miles apart. Ferris Ludlam looked at those 2 lines of numbers, and then he looked at the deed, and then he looked at me, and every bit of color went out of his face from the top down. He said one thing before his hand went up to his mouth. He said, "That instrument was recorded Friday morning." Neither one of those documents existed, because I outsmarted anybody. The badge log exists because a hospital has to prove who touched a bone saw. The tray log exists because a patient on a table has a right to know the tools were clean. Both of them were running long before any of these people thought of any of this. And the second proof was worse for her, because she paid for it herself. The doorbell camera she had installed over my grandmother's mailbox recorded on motion and kept 30 days, and her own account paid for the storage. It had her leaving that porch at 11:20 on the night of the 9th, and coming back at 12:40 in the morning. It had Marlowe on those steps on April 2nd saying the measurement man was booked for the 14th, and it had 11 minutes of audio out of that kitchen on the morning of the 14th, through an open front door, including my sister-in-law's voice saying I had to keep pushing her. And the green spiral notebook which the deputy took off that table had a page in it with my name written out 41 times in a row, getting better as it went down the page. My grandmother's will was signed in 2013. There is a clause in it she had mentioned to me twice at her own table, laughing, because she thought it was funny that a lawyer talked that way. Anyone who challenges the will, or attempts to transfer, encumber, or convey any property of the estate outside its terms, takes $1 and nothing else. She had left the house to me, and her savings, $94,300, split between me and Price, because she loved him and he used to shovel her walk. He signed nothing. He never had to. He sat at that table with his hands 6 inches off it, and he told a deputy that afternoon that he had been in the truck the whole time. Lorraine Vesey was arrested in the parking structure of Fairmont Mercy at 2:20 that Friday afternoon, while the luncheon was still serving dessert 40 feet away. She was charged with felonious assault, a felony of the 2nd degree, forgery, a felony of the 5th degree, tampering with records, a felony of the 3rd degree, and theft from a person in a protected class. She pled on July 22nd. On September 3rd, she was sentenced to 4 years at the Ohio Reformatory for Women in Marysville, ordered to pay $61,480 in restitution, at $400 a month beginning on release, and a 5-year protection order was entered, requiring her to stay 1,000 feet from me, and from 4127 Bellefonte Avenue. On April 21st, the Auxiliary Board voted 14-0 to remove her. The garden club she had belonged to for 31 years sent her a letter. She was not asked back to the church committee that ran the funeral luncheons, the thing she was proudest of in her life. Marlowe Vesey pled to attempted tampering with records and complicity, and on October 9th she got 18 months suspended, 3 years of community control, and 300 hours of community service at a county facility, plus $9,120 in restitution. On November 12, the Ohio Division of Real Estate revoked her license. Her face came off the bus bench in December. She sells cell phone plans now in a strip mall on Wilmington Pike. Price Vesey was charged with obstructing official business, a misdemeanor of the second degree, for what he told the deputy in that driveway. On June 11, he got 90 days suspended, a $1,000 fine, and 100 hours. And because of a line a lawyer wrote in 2013 that everybody thought was a joke, the $47,150 my grandmother meant for him became $1. He reached for a house and it cost him the only money anyone was ever going to leave him. Nobody had to lift a finger. It fired by itself. The notary in his office had her commission revoked on June 2nd and pled to a misdemeanor with a $2,500 fine. Ferris Ludlam turned his whole file over the same afternoon he went pale, and on August 5th he took a public reprimand from the Board of Professional Conduct and $3,000 in costs for what he had filed without checking. In July, before sentencing, Lorraine sold the house on Ashcombe Court, the one with the dining room nobody was allowed to eat in, for $319,500, to pay her attorney. Her things went into a storage unit in Trotwood that her sister paid for and then stopped paying for. Marlowe's fiancé moved out of the condo 3 weeks after her license was revoked. He took the ring with him. She told her mother on a recorded jail call that he said it was not the criminal part, it was that there was nothing left. The thing they did all of it for is the thing that walked out the door. At her sentencing, Lorraine was given the chance to speak. She stood up and said she was the only person in that family who had ever taken care of that old woman, that nobody had ever thanked her for a single thing, that she had spent her whole life giving, and this was what she got. She said it with her chin up. She believed it. She still believes it. In March, Price sent me a text asking me to write a letter to the parole board and asking if I could send him $2,000 because he was behind on the truck. I read it. I did not answer it, and I did not explain why. You are allowed to simply not answer. My grandmother came home from rehab on May 3rd. She could not be told any of it while she was in that bed, so I sat beside her and wrote on a legal pad, and she read my handwriting with her glasses down her nose and did not cry until she got to the part about the dog behind the basement door. I am in that kitchen most Sundays now. The coffee still gets left on the burner and it still smells scorched. The shelf liner with the strawberries on it is still up under that cabinet, and I have never replaced it. I look at it on purpose sometimes, from standing up. The scrub cap is on the hook by the back door where she hangs it for me. It went into an evidence bag on April 14th, and I got it back in a manila envelope on the 2nd of September. There is a stain in the check pattern along the band that did not come out. I still do the thing with my thumb. 3 passes along the inside seam before every shift. In my car. In the lot on Wayne Avenue, where I still work nights, because I never gave notice and I never will. It used to mean my grandmother wanted me to have something soft against my head. Now it means somebody sewed that seam by hand in 2016 so it would not scratch me, and that is the whole difference between the two families I have belonged to. 6 inches. That is how far my husband's hands ever came up off that table. At the sentencing he sat on the other side of the aisle and he did not look at me, and when it was over he stood up and put his coat on and left, and that is exactly 6 inches worth of a man, all the way to the end. There is one thing in that file I still do not have an answer for. In the green notebook, on a page behind the one with my name on it, there were 3 other names in Lorraine's handwriting with dates beside them, and 2 of them do not belong to anybody in our family, and one was a woman from the auxiliary who died in 2023. Nobody was ever charged over that page. It is still in a box in a county building on West 3rd Street. On the 30th of June, 11 weeks after, I was standing in that kitchen and the dog came up off the floor by the oven door and put his head against my leg, and something in my throat let go, and the first word I had said out loud since the 14th of April came out sideways and cracked. I said, "Gus." My grandmother put both hands flat on the table and said, "There she is." I could not say his name for 11 weeks. That is the actual injury, and no charge on any of those papers covers it. Family is not the people who show up in your kitchen. It is the people whose hands come all the way off the table.